and welcome to this Mobile World Live webinar. I'm Diana Guverts. I am Mobile World Live's US editor, and I am so pleased to be your moderator for this discussion. Today, we are going to tackle the exciting topic of digital telco transformation, examining what trends are driving the need for change, why legacy BSS systems just won't cut it, and some strategies for CSPs to consider as they move to future-proof their systems. Here in the studio with me today are some great folks from Capgemini, including Chris Landry, Vice President and Global Telco Domain Lead, Ravi Jayanthi, Telco Strategy and Solutions Leader, and Carl Bierstrom, who is Executive Vice President and Head of TMT for Capgemini Invent. I am so glad to have you all here.
Hey, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you.
So before we get started, I'd like to encourage our audience to engage with us by posting questions and comments. At the end of the presentation, we're going to take some time to answer those. And you can go ahead and type your questions and comments into the comment box below the presentation window. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So digital transformation is not a new trend generally, right? Or for telcos specifically. So what is driving the need to look at this now? What is your perspective on this?
That's a great question, Diana. You're absolutely right. It is not a new trend at all. We've been seeing this for some time, but we see that there's a couple of factors out there right now that are really setting the stage for what we see as the next big shift. Number one, we talk about digital convergence. This is a trend that's been continuing but really accelerating over the last couple of years, where CSPs are looking to own and control and participate more in the media supply chain. And ultimately what's behind that is content and understanding their customers and creating more robust experiences. But really what's even further behind that is the ability to create new digital products and new digital services. We're seeing a lot of interesting edge scenarios, things such as embedded solutions around gaming from the CSP's perspective. So that's number one. Number two, we also see that consumer expectations, everybody expects to be connected in all places, in all locations, in all contexts. So as we're enjoying those services, as we're enjoying that media, as we're enjoying that content, we're able to go wherever we want to go with that. And that's just the expectation. And our research shows that what consumers expect in terms of overall experience from their CSP, both in terms of being a digital operator and in the broader experience, is far below what's actually happening in the marketplace. So you take those two as the kind of the foundational items. And then as you start to project that forward into what's happening now, as we're getting ready for 5G, as we all know, I think we're at that inflection point where we're moving past the hype curve. We're actually starting to see the commercial deployments. It's still early days, and we're going to see some slight increase in speeds, but it's going to accelerate 10, 12x. And then we're going to have more massive machine-to-machine communication. And then finally, the ultra-high reliability scenarios coming on as well. So much like when we had the 4G LTE mobile revolution, nobody anticipated how much change that was going to drive and how much that's impacted our lives. So we really take a step back and we look at that time. And I think that's very much the case now. It's very difficult for us to say, here's all the use cases. We know generally what the underlying capability is, but how that'll be applied in the marketplace is the question mark. So from a CSP perspective, what we're advising is that they really start to build for the future and start to build for change. And we have some perspectives on maybe why they haven't been able to do that in the past.
Okay.
Yeah, and I want to build on what you're saying there, Chris.
Sure.
I think it's really interesting what you were alluding to and comparing sort of the 4G LTE situation to, as we now are, you used the word inflection point for 5G. I think it's going to be not just a point in time, it's going to be a journey and a couple of years that we're going to see here. And I think if the 4G transformation was really how do you sort of enable that transformation, maybe the telcos, as you said, and no one really anticipated how much transformation that would drive. But as we saw that happening, a lot of the value creation was perhaps not always with the telcos. So I think we estimate a 10 to 20% monetization gap for telcos in the 4G space. So really critical as you move into 5G. How do you sort of close that monetization gap? How do you monetize your services? And this is going to be the second wave of digital transformation for businesses, for societies. And I think why we're talking about the importance of this is in order to take that ambition and really drive that platform for your business as a telco, you need to have that platform, those systems be more flexible, agile than what you have today.
Excellent. So, I mean, that makes sense in terms of trends, right? Everybody's moving to digital. But what do we mean specifically when we talk about digital transformation? I mean, at least as it relates to CSPs.
Yeah, so we've been looking at this for quite some time. We've had joint research with the MIT since 2010, published a bunch of books and, across sectors and so on. But to your point, specifically for CSPs, we think about this from sort of two perspectives. One sort of external facing piece of this, which is about the touch points, the customer experience, the products and services that we all experience as consumers, as customers of telco services. And then the sort of internal side of the telco, which is about how do you orchestrate for this? So your capabilities, your technology and architecture, and the way that you're working internally. So we're going to touch upon both those two perspectives. But I think also interesting when we talk about this is ensuring that you also understand the drivers and the objectives that you're getting into. So for the customer experience, we know that a lot of telcos perhaps have an NPS that more flatlined. So perhaps 0, perhaps also negative, but there are some outliers who are really positive. So I think when we think about the definition here of digital transformation, the objective would be to go from a 0 NPS to something plus 40, plus 50. So a radical shift that would drive long-term profitability and top line. And then on the other side, in order to move with the market and be faster and more nimble on the digital capability side, it's how do we reduce the time to market? How do we really accelerate as a company? So going from months into perhaps days. So in both those dimensions, from a KPI perspective, when we talk about digital transformation, we really mean a big transformation in how you operate as a company.
Excellent. So wait. Let's back up for a second.
Sure.
What's wrong with the tried and true systems that CSPs have already? I mean, why can't those systems meet this new challenge?
Yeah, and I think it's a great question. I think when Carl talked about the monetization gap in the last mobile revolution, we spent a lot of time thinking about why didn't telco succeed in that. There wasn't a lack of trying. There was a lot of investment in trying to be in those markets, but what was actually stopping them? So if we go all the way back, historically, telcos have built all of their platforms from a consumer, from a customer management and revenue perspective around the specific line of business for voice and data. And while that was really great in terms of building resilient, consistent, scalable systems, it had some inherent structures that were put in around the actual products and the services. And therefore, as they tried to evolve, that rigidity became very difficult. So you start with that first, and then that's further compounded by the fact that meant that their data was very spread around. So almost all of our customers spend a lot of time and a lot of effort trying to bring all of that consumer data back together. Yeah. So one, they can increase that service quality and experience, both in the sales and service and the overall life cycle. But as well as, everybody has this perspective that telcos are an untapped wealth of data. So that's the other aspect. And then how do they actually integrate with that broader ecosystem has been a challenge for them as well. And so how do they, we talked about digital products up front, and if they can't quickly react to a new disruptive offer that's come from somewhere outside of the telco ecosystem, and then actually bundle that or create that as a value-added service, or actually go into that market, if they're limited by their core customer systems, that's going to be a big drag on them. So as we look at this next phase, that's really what we're advising, and that's what we're working towards, is how do we build flexibility into the process, into the system, all the way around the products and the services that we offer, so that as that change comes, they can react quickly and they can move and they can be part of that innovation, not just the disrupted side of that innovation.
Okay, so let's kind of jump into some of the nitty gritty, I guess, here, you would say. And I think, Ravi, we can get you involved in this as well. So what's needed in terms of the technology aspect of this?
Right, so before I get into the technology aspect of it, right, let me kind of reiterate what Carl and Chris just talked about. Digital transformation is about providing flexibility and agility to drive new business models, offer products and services more rapidly, and to reimagine the entire experience. Yes. And make the processes more nimble, whether it is procure to pay, order to cash, order to activate, or even trouble to resolve. Mm-hmm. So are there technological impacts? Absolutely, right? So because as goes your software, so goes your business. So let me start off with some of the architectural changes that are happening today. One, a mobile-first approach. Today, consumers or customers have a gamut of devices, be it mobiles, laptops, or tablets. And how do I provide a seamless customer experience across all of these device types, a frictionless commerce experience? The second aspect is most CSPs today have already embarked on the journey to the cloud and cloud native, right? So when we talk about the cloud, their application stacks are moving into the cloud, their networks are moving into the cloud. And it's not just about the applications by themselves, it's also about the data, both data in rest and data in motion. The next aspect of it is cloud native. Containerization of these applications to make them scalable, reliable, to be able to support faster release cycles, to be able to offer products and services more rapidly. From a technology perspective, software-defined everything has become the norm. Network functions are being virtualized. Software-defined networks are giving operators the capabilities to roll out new products and services rapidly and at a lower cost. SD-WAN, SD-LAN are good examples of that. AI/ML has taken on in a big time. We talked about a data backbone that we need to create the common data layer where I have a 360 and a 720-degree view of my customer data and my service data. AI/ML has taken on in a big way so that I can derive business intelligence out of this data, whether it is to improve my care processes, my sales analytics, my marketing analytics, or even self-healing networks, as we talked about when we talked about software-defined networks. But these are all the technology changes that are happening. And the last is most important, microservices and legacy isolation. Microservices is all about data separation and extracting the business logic. Basically, most of our ISPs today are faced with aging legacy platforms. How do I create a systems of aggregation layer which will isolate my systems of records from the systems of engagement, thereby providing a better customer experience, right? So hopefully that addresses the questions around technologies. Predominantly, it's around microservices, cloud native, and AI/ML.
Okay. So I understand the technology transformation aspect, but is this really all just about technology?
It absolutely is.
Okay.
No, no, of course not. It's not just about technology. It's about a full capability set and a full transformation. So when we think about technology, it's part of changing also process and people organization. So all that needs to come together. And you had a great point around also the information and data that needs to transpire through the company. So in that capability set, how do we make that flow in a different way? So absolutely critical, and I would say that it's important to think that in developing that capability set, how do we attract, develop new talent and skills in our company? And when we think about this, the way of working in the paper that's just launched,
Good plug.
It's
Good plug.
Yes, it's about ensuring we have a digital delivery model that can realize the full potential of those new technologies that we put in. And the transformation is really a transformation. It's going to not just be, hey, we go from a current state to a target state. It's going to be a continuous journey. So that's perhaps also really important to say here. When we think about digital transformation, it's number one, it's probably not a state, a constant, it's a journey. And second is, as you move that, as much as we like to think about digital transformation as some of the hard things and we need to put in place some of the technologies, it's also about orchestrating the change and make that happen. So back to your question, is it just about a technology transformation? No, it's not, but technology is super important, and we could also say that the digital transformation cannot happen without technology. So that's probably the summary of it.
Okay. So I'm hearing loud and clear that CSPs need new systems, right? That's coming through.
Yeah.
But where on earth do they even start? I mean, this seems like such a huge problem to tackle. I mean, what options are out there for them to consider?
You're right, and we struggle a little bit just to boil down really what are that, because it's a large continuum. It's not A, B, or C. And they're not mutually exclusive. So, for the sake of illustration and for our analysis and the work that we were doing, we thought about it in kind of 3 different areas, but again, we see it on a continuum. So the first one that we talk about is the full digital greenfield. That can be both in terms of an entirely new brand, but it can also just be an entirely new technology stack with a refined set of products. In the case of the entirely new brand, I think the thing that we're all most familiar with as a consumer is the online-only banks. So translating that back to a CSP perspective, they could not necessarily need to carry the weight of retail or live care. They could start to bring in AI and machine learning to drive that care experience, as Ravi alluded to before. But the biggest thing underneath that, the reason we call it Greenfield, is kind of an obvious word, is that they're not carrying in the weight of their old products, their old offers. They're able to be very clean and simple and think about what does a customer actually want today. They're very transparent in the way that they expose those offers. Where we've seen that be most successful is where it's a more disruptive play. In some places, it's been more of a niche, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the capabilities that are around that. But that's the first one, the full digital greenfield brand. The second one that we talked about, leverages some of that, but is different in that rather than focusing on an entirely new customer and revenue management experience, we're talking about a general focused experience, and we see this coming up in a couple of places. Particularly in the MSO space, where they're known to have some service challenges and there's a very complex technical process to resolve those. There's a big opportunity to go after the support side there, whether that's just on the way that you interact from an online or mobile perspective and the technology around that. But we also see it in sales. And on the consumer side, that could be in how I can actually purchase the capabilities or bring new devices in or new services in, et cetera. But on the B2B side, we see a big change happening in what the expectation is for what is nominally known as CPQ or configure price quote. And what's behind that is the need for frictionless commerce for B2B, particularly with 5G coming. We've done some studies around that, and there's a huge appetite. I think we referenced it in the paper, the transformation that's coming around. But if that becomes a cumbersome process to interact with the telco and use those services, it's going to be challenging. So we see CPQ as a focus within that. So full digital greenfield, focused experience dimension. The last one, which Ravi touched on a little bit, but I'm going to give it a little bit more of a flavor, is when we bring in legacy isolation through digital architecture. And this is about taking your core legacy systems, wrapping them with the system of aggregation layer, and ultimately what's at the front of that is allowing those front-end systems to develop new products, new experiences, without having to work within some of the rigid structures that are there, and to a certain extent not even being aware of the structures that are behind. That is a journey, and it takes some time as well. So again, those are the 3 that we think about: is the full digital greenfield brand, the focused experience dimension, and then legacy isolation through digital architecture.
Okay, so it seems like a lot to take in.
Sure.
So I'm wondering if you can kind of give me a pros and cons list. I mean, which scenario works best for what use case?
Yeah. So, if we talk about the full digital greenfield brand, this is a, new implementation. So there's a certain amount of upfront cost with any time we do something new. And depending on how far we go with the brand, there's a commitment of the business from a, speed and complexity perspective. The nice thing about it takes out some of the risk and uncertainty of, oh my gosh, we don't know what we built into these platforms. It's a very clean approach. So the pro is, if we want to go after an untapped market segment that's being underserved or for whatever reason our traditional brand can't penetrate, it's a way for us to tap into that. Or if we're a challenger play, it's a way for us to move quickly and really disrupt the marketplace. And we've seen some great examples of that across the globe. So this is a trend we see across the globe, and our digital observatory has seen where it's been successful and where it's not. We have it in North America and Europe and in Asia and in both developed and developing economies as well. So that's on the full digital greenfield. On the focused experience dimension, the advantage here is it's usually reacting to either an acute pain point or an acute revenue opportunity that's out there. So we talked a little bit about B2B as an example. If you're an operator that's moving into the B2B space and you're lagging behind, this is a way to accelerate And that's great from a speed perspective. Same thing if you're struggling with your customer satisfaction around any of the core processes. It could be on the sales side, it could be on the service side, et cetera. But the point is it's a very quick way to create a better enhanced experience. The big drawback to this approach is we're not typically going in and fundamentally changing the core of that customer model, that core of that product experience, and therefore you're not really addressing some of your long-term problems. So it's a good short-term solution and might not solve everything, depending on how you build out that roadmap and the way that you're going about it. But again, we think of this as the advice we give. It's all about focusing on solving one process area. And the last one, legacy isolation, as we talked about, I said it was broad-based, and what we mean by that is really this is about modern software engineering. So this is coming out of the most adaptive, most modern technology organizations and the way they build their stuff. CSPs have started to adapt it. Some of our customers are much further along than others. It's to a certain degree, it's a lower cost start because we're talking about an architecture approach, a strategy approach, not necessarily building a whole new platform or a project. So we can start to move in this direction in the way that we're working today. And the question mark, I think, becomes, how mature are our teams? It's not we can snap our finger and a guy's developing something one way and then he can do it another way.
Right.
So we have to figure out, is our IT and engineering organization able to take that step forward, or our partners, if you're outsourcing that to a partner, and how are they actually going to bring that forward? So taking a big step back from all three, I think it's about how do we blend those into a perspective of here's the lines of business that we have today. We know we need to be digital. We know what that means. Here's what's also coming up. How do I blend those for both my short and long-term goals and balance that out and be very deliberate in the strategy? I think what's happened is, I think in the first wave of digital transformation, maybe one of the mistakes was we tried these broad brush digital transformations where everybody was going to move towards it for the same purpose and the same reason across all aspects of our business. And that made it very difficult to know what the goal is. And what we're advising now is, several digital programs, but laser focused on a measurable goal where we can see that result in shorter term. Because again, it's about moving us towards an environment where we're built for that change and we can carry that forward. So that's kind of how we think about how to do it. But again, it's not mutually exclusive. They can all work together in concert to deliver the outcome.
Okay. So we would not be sitting here talking about this if this was all just theory.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, can you guys go ahead and share some real-world examples of these strategies in action? Like, who is using this and how?
Oh, absolutely. So I know Chris talked about the three approaches. I'll give real-world examples of each one of those, right? Starting with full Greenfield. A lot of implementations, a lot of operators have tried to go down this approach when they're trying to launch digital operators truly as a digital operator. The most interesting example that I can think of is what Orange has done in Poland with the introduction of the Flex product. They truly wanted to disrupt the market. They wanted to be a true digital operator. They did not want to carry the baggage of their legacy applications. So a simple app-based offering to their consumers, right? What does that mean? One-click offer customization, one-click pay and go, and self-service for digital care. Now, something very similar has been done by Verizon with the Visible product offering and Reliance in India for Jio, right? So great examples of true Greenfield implementations. We'll walk into the next one, which is about, focused experience, right? Now, a tier one operator in Europe wanted to transform their entire B2B enterprise segment because they had too many disjointed processes. So they actually redid their entire, again, specific focus on the B2B segment. They redid their entire configure, price, quote, order management capabilities to provide better customer experience and to simplify their order management processes. So that's a focused dimension. And the last one, as Chris mentioned, which is your legacy isolation. This is, I think, the most prevalent as a part of digital transformation across all ISPs globally, or CSPs globally. They are carrying the baggage of their legacy applications. They need to isolate that functionality. In most cases, custom functionality has been built into these legacy applications. They need to abstract that. So the best way to do that, to give them the flexibility to offer new products and services on the fly, is to create that systems of aggregation that Chris talked about and isolate your systems of records from the systems of engagement. So the most prevalent thing from a transformation perspective is using microservices to isolate your legacy applications. But those are some good examples of each of the three approaches that Chris talked about.
Maybe if I could build on that a little bit,
sure.
Ravi, I think one of the things that we see with this is one of the challenges that some of our customers have is they don't necessarily have control of a lot of their data because of some of the platform choices that have built up. And I think this is a first step in kind of retaking control. But what we're strongly advising our clients is, be aware of these, kind of single platform to solve everything, because that's just not the world that we live in anymore. Whether we're talking about, the core customer revenue management applications, or even way outside of this in ERP, everybody's using to a model where let those applications do the part that they're good at and expose that capability to the broader organization. And what that's about is, how do we create that need for change constantly, right?
Absolutely.
And not boiling us into one particular capability set.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would also build on that a little bit, where you're saying let's try and isolate different things. I think that's fair, and I think that's right. I think it gives an acceleration to the enterprise. I still think that we, with that, just want to clarify, we're still seeing that the need for an overarching sort of goal and objective of why you're changing.
Right.
And that enforces what you do, how you do it, and which of these strategies you pursue.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so the need is there, the trends are changing, there are a couple different strategies on the table, but how do CSPs get this journey started?
Yeah, so in that question, how do you get it started? I think what we also say here is everyone is already on the move, and people are doing this. So it's not about getting it started. Maybe it's about redirecting and maybe thinking about, again, why you do it, how you do it, what you do. And I think if we sort of go through a little bit what we talked about here today, we talked first about what does digital mean, what are the trends, and what are the objectives that you are embarking on. So I think that's sort of the first step. Then we have the different technologies, architecture pieces, and a digital delivery model that we have as a target state, which are the what's of the transformation. And then lastly, around the how. So what approach do you take to move the company? So you need to sort of address all these three. But typically you would take a step back, you would quickly assess, to Chris's point earlier, where are you? What are your sort of skills and situations? If we go back here, you sort of start assessing your current situation around speed, cost, complexity, future ready, to start framing up your approach. Mostly important is understanding what are the quantitative objectives that you're actually going to have to do. You also need to probably break down some of the organizational barriers to how do you get some of your key functions involved and mobilized. And we typically do this as a kind of a discovery piece, where it takes you maybe 8-10 weeks to get rallied around that. But then back to what we ended with, the three transformation approaches, you'd select one of those, and then you start doing that. And obviously, the how you get started on that depends on which of those you have. But it will be typically a design-led transformation, regardless of what that is, especially on the digital brand. But even if you have the legacy isolation approach and you decide upon that, you need to understand how will that impact that customer experience. So if it's if we take the B2B example, the CPQ one, it's really important to understand how that impacts the customer, also the user, right? How does it impact my sales rep?
Right.
And what's the vision there? So that sort of summarizes what I think they need to do now.
Just got a comprehensive view of all this here, so that was wonderful. We're going to shift gears just a little bit. We're going to jump into our Q&A segment. To everybody watching, just a reminder that we want you to engage with us, and you can still submit your questions by typing into the comment box below the presentation window. So we are going to go ahead and switch over to some of your questions. And the first one that we have coming in here from our audience, what is the prize or the end goal for the telco with this digital transformation? What's the light at the end of that tunnel? Because this is obviously a big undertaking, right?
Yeah,
so I mean,
it is.
why?
It is. I mean, that's really what we what we ended with, the price. Be clear on the price. And as I said in the beginning, maybe your current MPS is maybe even negative. So how do you think about the price is, okay, the price would be a long-term profitability. You get into serving customers in a different way and providing a completely different experience. I think that the price is also, where are you if you do nothing? So what's the do nothing scenario? Yeah. And for me, that's getting stuck there is probably the most burning platform. Yeah. Like if you don't do anything, that you're going to have two things. I don't think it's sustainable. I think also the competition is moving. So unless you move, you'll be further detracted in that way. So the price is on one hand moving with the market. We see great examples of people really doing that shift, doing the transformation, being embarked in that, and I think if you get into the 5G environment in a couple of years, if you don't have the right flexible platforms to engage, you'll not be able to close the monetization gap we were talking about either. So your brand will not be there, and unfortunately your money will not either.
Carl's maybe a little bit more polite than me, but I think the phrase that we throw around when we're being a little bit blunt is we don't want to be the dumb pipe. So I think part of what we are working with our customers on is how do they stay ahead of those expectations to be relevant. I think the great news about the CSP space is they have long, very trusted relationships. I also think that when you look at the media space right now and all the DCC push, I think there's going to be a backlash in that space, and there's a play for the CSPs to really bring all these different options out there and be the platform provider of that. And the person that, number one, has the platform side, but then cracks the experience side, to your point, it's about designing for that. They're going to stay away from that, right? People are going to see them as a trusted relationship and the CSP that they want to work with, and not see them just as a CSP. I think a lot of our CSPs even get mad when we compare them to each other because they're trying to go much further than that. And I think that's the goal, is we don't want them to end up in that dumb pipe. Want to use a little bit more of a crude way of saying it.
Yeah, crude, like as in oil. Pipe.
Yeah. and to add
Good
to
pun.
that, right, I think the biggest driver for all of this is time to market.
Right, time to market.
So,
yeah. Agreed.
Okay. We got some good questions coming in. Please keep them coming. We want more.
Sure.
So we're going to jump on to the second question. And we kind of touched on this briefly. What does the do nothing plan look like for a telco? So, we were talking about why they need to. So what happens if they don't? Why should they care?
Yeah, and you're right. We did touch on it. So at risk of not repeating, I think the biggest thing is that they actually want to accelerate the profitability. This is a very capital-intensive industry, and it's all about ROI, and that's really what we're pushing with them. Is if you do nothing, your pressure on your profitability is going to continue. The investments that CSPs have made, there's been a lot of consolidation in the marketplace. If they don't rapidly address a broader value statement, they're going to have a lot of pressure on profitability, and again, we're going to end up in that pipe situation that we talked about before.
I would add to it, I would say that you're opening yourself up to what's the relevance of an operator for a consumer in the future and for an enterprise? So like, how do you defend your role? And I think in some of our research, we've even asked that question, right, to consumers, like, would you prefer, a Google / a Spotify or something to offer you mobile services versus your operator? Right. And it's clear that people want a different operator. I think we have some good examples of people actually thinking about that and putting that into place. You mentioned Orange Poland. I could mention Smarty in the UK as well. Yeah. But I think, what does a do-nothing situation look like? It's becoming a utility and becoming irrelevant. And you mentioned dumb pipe. I throw in the utility word there. So you definitely need to change and to participate. So if you don't participate in that platform, that again, telco probably is the biggest platform on the planet. How do you ensure that you can monetize and facilitate that exchange on that platform and be part of that value creation? That's the key question.
And the rapidly changing world, right, where products and services are being offered by the day, in some cases in North America, it just reduces your flexibility and agility, right? So that's the do nothing.
Okay.
Fair enough.
So we got another one coming in here. What is next for you? What else are you going to be working on next?
So I'll maybe take a stab at that. But so yeah, we from a CSP perspective, we work closely with our research institute and a couple of ones that we think are relevant to this space. And questions we had a descope from actually this latest paper that just launched, the second shameless plug. 5G for the intelligent industry. Lots of interesting conversations, both from a CSP perspective, but there's broad interest, right? So this is something we released last year. We're going to be updating that for this year and really kind of building on that. I think we've probably hit on this several times, but we didn't explore this very much in the paper. We're already doing a fair amount of work in the B2B space and seeing, really what does that opportunity look like? What are the ingredients that are going to get there? I think as long as I've been in the CSP space, how we actually enable what are relatively complex enterprise products in a frictionless way has been one of the oldest problems. I've been working on projects for this for the last 15, 20 years.
What did you achieve, Chris?
It's still not a perfectly solved problem, so that's something that we're looking at. Related to that as well is we're looking, at smart cities, and we've seen this more in Europe, where we've seen some good progress there, and looking at what are the consortiums and what are the business models. What we see in that space is that it's not so much a problem of the technology itself, but it's the business case and how do we actually enable that. But we know that the public wants it. So looking at how do we actually accelerate that perspective, so smart cities. And as we touched on a little bit up front, media as well. So how are people consuming media? We think media is actually driving the biggest need for the ways the CSP act in the world. We're all very constantly engaged, whether that media is in some of the traditional as well as the non-traditional media that's out there. We think that place is incredibly interesting, and we see a lot of investment in consumer analytics and really seeing how that can drive the content that we're going to create going forward. And we think that's a huge opportunity for CSPs.
I think to build on this, I think we think about 5G and standalone 5G coming, but it's going to take a little bit of time. I think there's still a clear call to action to enterprises, as well as operators and network providers, to think about how do we, in what way can we use private networks to accelerate this shift. And I think it's a private network going from LTE and a mesh into 5G. And I think there's a lot of things that can be done, and the wait and see approach on how do you monetize 5G in the right way. I think if you wait until the business case is fully proven, you're going to be late, and the tipping point has already happened, and others are going to take that. So I think, again, different approaches and different things, but I think if we think about some of the opportunities right here, right now, we're working with some of those, around the globe. We see a tremendous opportunity there. So, what are we working on next? Well, we're working on making sure that our customers actually generate some money.
Yeah.
And to add to that, right, with the advent of 5G, IoT, a lot of work in edge computing as well, because it's very important that most of this, with the growing data volumes, most of this computing happen at the edge, not at the core. So a lot of AI ML work as it relates to the growing number of devices and the intelligence that can be derived from that.
You guys got a lot going on. Goodness. So the good news is the questions are flooding in.
Okay.
So we're going to jump along to another one.
Does that mean we know who's going to win the bet on how many we get?
We don't know. We don't know. Okay. So the next question is, how do you see the data challenge connected to the digital transformation? Because I know we were talking about data a lot earlier. So can we maybe jump in on this?
Yes. Sure. I mean, so I think it's almost synonymous in a way. I think if we don't think about data insights, there's no digital transformation. It is, number one, data is the new oil, so we all know that. And I think, Chris, you talked about how, as you move into convergence, why are you addressing that space? It's to build customer engagement, also understand, how you flow that data. So there's absolutely data transformation, and that data transformation, back to our sort of external, internal point, It's how do you use data and insights to improve that customer experience and products and services, but also how do you use insights to improve your internal operation, right, and your delivery model. And I think data as such is what binds us and surrounds us, to use a Star Wars phrase. How do you use it as the force to sort of break down some of the barriers in the company? Because if you interpret data and insights differently in different departments, you use different nomenclature and different KPIs, it's going to be very difficult. So I think data is what can bind the company together and partners together, and it's super important. And I would also plug here for, it's not just data insights, it's how do we, of course, secure that, and how do we make sure that that data is trusted and so on, and how do we facilitate that exchange.
I'll jump in on the secure point, because I think that's always been the fear for a telco, is that, number one, they're everywhere you are in the world, they're heavily regulated, so what they can do with data versus what the new tech giants can do with data has been different. So that's part of the challenges. They're always trying to figure out what they can do. And then we talked about this in the constraints of the legacy BSS. Everything about that customer was built around that product and how that product was modeled and how I actually had to build something on a network. And so if I wanted to do something completely different, the way that I had envisioned that customer, the way that I had thought about my relationship with them was hardwired. And so what actually happens, to do all the stuff that Carl was talking about, I'm pulling all of that data out and I'm sitting somewhere else and I'm looking at it differently. And what we see is there's an opportunity when you use that data spine and you use that data backbone at that aggregation layer. You don't necessarily have to mash everything together. You can watch the events around that customer and react in real time with actually relatively small amounts of data. I think it's, in some ways, we're trying to simplify because we have so much data that we're spending so much time just putting it together, and we really think that's the wrong direction. How do we simplify, use the infrastructure that we're putting in place from a digital perspective, and then react to that in real time to create experiences for our consumers?
So to add to that, right, digital transformation will fail if data is not used as the lever to drive context-driven interactions.
And
right?
why is that?
So for example, let's look at a customer care process, right? Typically, it's either an inside-out process where the customer is dictating, or an outside-in where, the inside-in where we are doing it based on our enterprise data, or an outside-in where the customer is deciding the interaction. It has to be data-driven interactions, insights-driven interactions. So data is the driver for pretty much everything in terms of customer interactions to really, truly get the best customer experience out.
Excellent. So let's go ahead and jump on to one of our next questions. They're really coming in. Goodness. Okay, so what is the role of public cloud technologies in their convergence with the telecom space? Public cloud is dominant and private cloud is going small. Is aggregation in public cloud the way to go?
I think I think there's an assumption in that question that I would challenge. I think some telcos are really down the road. I think most everybody, at least in their web presence, is already in public cloud, and down at the network level, we're using private cloud effectively, and then everything in the middle is a bit of a mix. We don't believe it's one or the other. To the point that we talked about edge, it's very much about the private public hybrid cloud that's 100% where everybody's going, and even in the three big giants in that space, they're starting to talk in that way. They realize it as well. They're having to adjust the way that they're operating and just being public cloud. I do think that hybrid is going to be the way, and I think telcos, a lot of them have really just started down this road. So I don't think it's one or the other. I think hybrid's going to be the answer. At one of our larger customers, we see that they're using all of the major public clouds.
Yeah.
They still have their own data centers, and to the point about edge computing, they're looking at how do they actually leverage all of those different locations for the different types of applications and really optimize and harmonize that, and to a certain degree do that in a way where it's somewhat independent from the way that the developer is building the application. Okay.
Anything to add?
Yeah. I can add.
Should? No.
No, I think it's certainly interesting. I mean, in the cloud domain, I think one key thing we talked about, a platform or platforms or as 5G comes in, how do you monetize that? a key thing of getting that platform working is how do you attract developers, not just sort of the consumer side of things, but the producer side of things. And if you don't find a way of collaborating with the big public clouds, I think it's going to be very difficult to get enough developers on your platform. So I think that collaboration needs to happen. But I think it's also on the telco side, if we think about all of the virtualization that goes on, we're really creating a cloud of clouds around the operators, which is really probably the biggest cloud and server space that exists on the planet. So, we've always talked about, can telcos become a cloud provider over the last couple of years, and perhaps have tried and not always succeeded. But I think they will be succeeding in that space when we get that harmonization going on the edge as well. So. Again, cloud, what is it? It's elasticity in compute, elasticity in data and storage, and now hopefully elasticity also in networking. And I think that's where the telco really can provide value into when we think about cloud, elasticity and networking, which is what 5G promises. So back to your question, in terms of collaborating with public clouds and thinking about cloud, I think telcos in that way of providing elasticity in networking is part of what cloud should be in the future.
No, perfect.
Okay. We're going to see how many we can squeeze in here. It might just be one more. We're going to see. How does omni-channel customer experience fit into the digital transformation?
That's a great one. Do you want to take a stab, or do you want me to go?
No, I mean, if you want me to stab someone, I can.
No stabbing here, please.
Okay. I mean, we talked about the customer experience of being, almost a definition. I'm just backing up to the slide here of customer experience. So yes, omni-channel, how we touch the different customers in a consistent way. And we debated actually before going on here, how do we think about mobile first, right? Which is critical to omni-channel. And we were also debating, should we say mobile first or should we say data AI first? But I think the combination of that is really the underlying capability and it's principle,
really not one
principle for ensuring that omnichannel experience. So yes, it's part of it, and I think it's what we almost mean with number one there.
Yeah, I agree, and I would add, if I kind of take it a layer in, I think where most people have spent a lot of time figuring this out is on the sales side, and maybe once I already have a problem, but this really we still have a disjointed world when it comes to all of those interactions across all life cycles. So how do I start a process somewhere else, and then how do I actually make sure that it's closed at all touch points? So I think we've probably over-indexed on the commerce side of omni-channel, because that's kind of the first point. But there's a whole other part of the life cycle of the customer and bringing them new offers and bringing them new capabilities that really should be an omni-channel experience as well.
The
so
care aspect as well. Yeah.
Okay. I'm checking the clock. I think we have time to sneak in one more. Okay. Where does the UX UI sit in this whole landscape of things?
Awesome.
Great question.
Did I stump you?
It's critical. It's absolutely critical. When we embark on, especially on the Greenfield, but the others too, transformations, it needs to be design-led. So bringing in designers into the process that has an idea of wireframing what the experience might look like is absolutely critical. So UX, UI is critical, and the demand from consumers as well as B2B customers that's going to come in is driven from your Spotify and your other apps that are out there. So unless you have a perspective and a capability and skills to do that, you're not going to get the right impact that you want on NPS.
Actually, this is another topic we were talking yesterday. When we talk about customer experience, if UIs are built without a human-centered design thinking or a user experience design thinking, leveraging researchers and designers, as Carl eloquently mentioned, those UIs are truly not going to improve your customer experience unless you do that, right?
Yeah.
So,
maybe I'll take one more kind of angle on it. And we were talking recently about this and kind of combining both the AI ML side and the employee side. We focus so much on the customers as well, but I think particularly now as we're starting to give the employees that are driving our customer experience. Ultimately, we're not trying to make these inhuman businesses, right? And so how do we create UI UX experience that puts the employee at the center and can drive that experience, leveraging AI ML so that they're racing with the machines and they're only provided what they need in the right way, in the right context? I think that's a huge opportunity. I think when we applied AI machine learning in the past, we did that to push the customers away from us and not necessarily engage with us and create a richer experience with our employees. So I think UI UX plus AI ML for the employees is a way to really humanize your business, but at the same time focus that investment and focus that human labor on the interaction side.
Excellent. All right, guys. I think that is a good place to wrap things up. So thank you, Chris, Ravi, and Carl for joining us today. You guys have given us some really great insights. And thank you, of course, to our audience for engaging with us. We have a whole flood of questions. And don't worry, because we are going to make sure that Capgemini gets back to you on all of those. And also, don't forget to check out their new white paper, just came out. Make sure you go check it out. So we'll be making a replay of this session too, in case you missed anything, available to you very shortly, so you'll have a chance to catch up. Thank you again to everyone for joining us, and that's a wrap.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.